Hi. So I've been thinking about communication and how it is perceived as one of the most critical aspects in the peaceful coexistence of human beings. The better you communicate, and the better are the chances for you and people to live a peaceful, harmonious life together. I've been thinking about that, and this is what I was observing. What is communication at its best? It's not necessarily words used or vocabulary or how it's delivered. The best of communication is often used to refer to two people or three people or four people who doesn't really have to use words to communicate. They seem to have an understanding of each other. They seem to have a good connection between each other where they don't have to speak much to communicate their ideas. So with that in mind, I'm not sure if we should be focusing so much on communication with words and with ideas, mm, or should we focus on doing our best in the absence of communication? It cannot exist without communication, and without education, the idea of coexistence or evolution of us as people is literally impossible. But even though that is the case, I understand that communication is the very foundation to education. But my issue isn't communication polluted? Anytime I speak to you, the matter that I'm involved in right now, where I'm communicating to you about communication, I believe any idea or any thought that comes out of me, which could be based of an idea that I heard or something I learned or something I observed, it could all be polluted, as polluted as it could be. And when I say polluted, it's polluted by my sentience, by my emotions. And there's no way for me to give it to you any other way. It has to be influenced by my emotions and sentience. I cannot provide you pristine and pure information through communication, and nobody can for that matter. And this is what I find as conflicting when I talk about education relying on communication between people. So, what then? Can machines communicate without influence to share and educate ideas and concepts that would mean a change? Yes, um, but then machines are developed by people, so how do I essentially say that machines are possible? Machines are capable of communicating without polluted ideas, without the influence of sentience or emotions or people as such. Now, the other side of it, we are celebrating communication. We look at people around the world who has a platform to speak, to write, to explain themselves and via music, via words, via speech. As much as we celebrate this great communicators, if I may call them so, as much as we celebrate them, we're not really celebrating the fact that they are so good at communication. We are celebrating the fact that it's not even the ideas that we are celebrating of these people that are supposedly great speakers, authors, orators. What we're celebrating is their ability to defend their ideas or make offenses to people who stand against them. And um, it's basically we marking the person we root for as a protagonist and the other person is an antagonist, and we are celebrating the victory of the protagonist or the fight put up by the antagonist to defend their ideas, to convince their ideas of their conviction. We are celebrating that it's not we're not really celebrating two people communicating and creating an environment that we are so unfamiliar with, that is peaceful, that is harmonious, that has all the elements that we probably have not yet been able to clearly define when we talk about utopia or the ideal human living condition. Communication has never been about that. Communication has been about being where we are now and debating and agreeing and arguing and disagreeing and persuading and convincing and criticizing and scrutinizing and insulting. That's what it's been about, and we celebrate versions of this as opposed to what is achieved. We celebrate what is achieved, but what is achieved is often marked as heroism or villainism or um, the lack of both, where some ideas, even though they are really remarkable, is never seen because it's never communicated. And um, you look at the greatest minds of the world, and they've all said the wisest people are often the ones who stay quiet. And I'm confused. So maybe what we should aim at is not to reach a point where everybody has a voice and these voices are confronting each other, creating so much white noise you don't know who to listen to. That's not probably what we should aim at. Instead, what we should aim at is the absence of the need to constantly communicate, to um, thrive in the absence of it, to be able to think about the whole of existence of us first whenever we do any actions, and the way you don't really need to communicate. And I mean that's what we understand. Point of communication is to help and to be there for each other. I mean that's what is essentially life is about. Life is as pointless as it maybe. It's about being there for each other to travel through this pointlessness. And so, how do we be there for each other when it's not really necessarily about being physically present for everybody? It's about being there through communication. But that seems like a compensation we if we if our instincts are to first think about our existence as opposed to my existence, then the necessity of communication becomes that much less. And that's my point. So when earlier said about the pollution that is present in our ability to communicate or our communication, I don't just mean the influence of sentience and emotions and the state of mind at the very point we express ourselves or speak to each other, but it's also about how the sense of self and the sense of you versus me is attached to everything we communicate. I recently observed in my interaction with my friends in my close circle that it's almost an involuntary tendency in us to speak about people, to speak about another person as part of conversation. We are not really always talking about how can we work together at any given point of time to achieve what we want to achieve in life and to help achieve others what they want to achieve in life. We're talking about things and people, and it's almost like forms of communication such as gossip or complaining or making fun of other people. Those have become so ingrained in ourselves. I find it almost like an involuntary tendency in people when they sit together. When two people or three people sit together, there's natural inclination. There is a natural inclination for people to make the conversation about a person not present, and it just seems so interesting to the parties involved. And I don't understand why. I have been trying to take a deliberate effort to separate myself from the need to converse like that. And if I have to have a positive conversation to take place rather than a funny criticizing, scrutinizing, or a joking way of talking about somebody, I try to be as positive as I can be because that makes sense in terms of ideal communication than anything else. Maybe if all of our goals as people is to create utopia, whether it's for the personal self or whether it's for the collective existence, we still think of communication as the pillars to its building. However, I still think in a utopia that the humanity or all living things would find equally um, satisfactory. In a utopia like that, there is an absence of communication as opposed to the presence of one, or the evolved presence of what we call communication. And whether it's writing or reading or speaking or what I'm doing now, I'm improved versions of this is called as evolved versions of it, but my understanding is an evolved form of communication. The perfect communication happens when there is no need to vocalize it, to gesturize it, if that's the word, to have to express. I think every expression is an art, but we are so crowded by expressions that it's no longer art. It's just everywhere, all over the place, white noise, and we have learned to ignore it. And expression is often seen as communication, expression of feelings. So essentially, you could ask me if I'm talking about the very commonly created fictitious world where emotions are absent, and that's often described as a perfect world. There's been a lot of movies that discuss such a state of existence, and then the story is often about people breaking free from it. All right. Um, am I talking about that? Is that what we're getting to? One person's utopia is another person's hell, I suppose, and that's what we see through those stories as well. The existence of an emotion-free society, where there's no polluted communication, or with the absence of emotion and sentience. That is, I'm not, I'm not saying to shut it down, but a trained way where we constantly analyze if our emotion is pertinent to a situation, if it needs to be expressed, an opinion. The the very concept of opinion is it even necessary to form opinions? They are formed, but then does it need to be expressed? Will this create, so what does this world create? Does it create one of those sci-fi nightmares where stone-faced stoic people just live when there's no feelings and there's everything as a pattern, and suddenly somebody's breaking free because it doesn't, it no longer feels like free will. I think the compulsive nature in us to communicate is a reminder that we are animals, and to believe that the fact that we cannot do without communication is a reminder that we are still animals and not evolved beings by any means. Just because how we communicate is different from a lion roaring or a dog barking doesn't mean that we are evolved being. We just found a different way to do it. So, well, the answer is I do not really know. I don't understand the need for celebrating communication as this quintessential aspect of civilization. But I'm intrigued by the idea that the objective of communication should be to reach a point where we don't need to do it to be able to coexist as we must. I think the most polluted communication is often the spoken word. And it's funny, the spoken word is often seen or called as the voice than the written word or a gesture. So maybe the spoken word, I don't know if it's censorship or political correctness that is going to solve the problem. I believe it's not. It's going to act adversely, if anything. But I believe it is a reprogramming of our thoughts and ideas and our nature that would change what and how communication should be, and to reach a point where communication is easy, where the spoken word is not necessarily dissolving the basic understanding that you and me and we all are nearly the same and we want the same things and we just want to coexist and find a way to help each other live. So think about it. I'm not really sure if I know, but I would love to know if somebody believes there's another way around it or if I'm wrong. I can't wait to be wrong. And that's one another point that we should probably try to achieve with communication. Always look to be wrong so that we can consistently try to be better and to be right and to be correct, if that make any sense.